December 1st, 1943, Rjukan, Norway. The morning mist clung to the Hardangervidda plateau like a shroud, masking the most audacious military operation the world had never heard of. At 0347 hours, 34 American B-24 Liberators thundered through Norwegian airspace, their Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines drowning out the silence of the frozen wilderness below. Each aircraft carried 2,700 gallons of fuel and a payload that would determine whether Adolf Hitler's scientists would unlock the secrets of atomic warfare. Major Robert Iron Mike Rosen gripped the control yoke of Lady Liberty, lead bomber of the 392nd Bombardment Group. Ice crystals formed on his oxygen mask as he peered through the cockpit glass at the target below. The Norsk hydro plant in Vemork, a fortress of concrete and steel nestled in the Telemark region's treacherous valleys. The facility appeared deceptively peaceful, its smokestacks releasing white vapor into the Arctic air. But Rosen knew better. "Target acquired," he radioed to his squadron. "Commence bombing run." What the major couldn't see from 12,000 feet was Dr. Jomar Brun, the plant's chief engineer, frantically destroying research documents in his office. Brun's hands trembled, not from the cold but from the knowledge of what those papers contained. For 3 years, he had overseen the production of heavy water, deuterium oxide, the critical component Hitler's physicists needed for their nuclear reactor experiments. The Norwegian scientist had become an unwilling participant in a race that could reshape civilization itself. The genesis of Operation Freshman. 6 months earlier, in a windowless briefing room beneath Whitehall, British intelligence officer Lieutenant Colonel Mark Henniker had spread aerial reconnaissance photographs across a mahogany table. The images revealed the Vemork plant's expansion, new electrolysis chambers, reinforced storage tanks, and a production capacity that had tripled since 1940. "Gentlemen," Henniker addressed the assembled Allied commanders, "this facility produces 99.5% pure heavy water at a rate of 10,000 pounds annually. German scientists require approximately 5 tons for a functioning nuclear pile." The mathematics were terrifying. At current production rates, Hitler's atomic program could achieve critical mass within 18 months. General James Doolittle, architect of the famous Tokyo raid, leaned forward. "What's our window?" "Intelligence suggests the Germans are planning to evacuate their entire heavy water stockpile to the fatherland by Christmas," Henniker replied. "We estimate 1,400 pounds currently in storage, enough for preliminary reactor tests." The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. If Nazi scientists successfully initiated a controlled nuclear chain reaction, the Third Reich would possess a weapon capable of obliterating entire cities. The war's outcome hung in the balance of deuterium molecules. The impossible mission planning Operation Freshman required solving an aeronautical puzzle that defied conventional wisdom. The Vemork plant sat in a valley 200 feet wide, surrounded by mountains rising 3,000 feet on either side. Approaching aircraft would have less than 8 seconds to acquire the target, drop their payload with precision, and execute a climbing turn to avoid collision with granite walls. Captain William Wild Bill Casey, the mission's bombardier specialist, calculated the odds during endless practice runs over the Scottish Highlands. "We need to hit a target 150 feet long and 60 feet wide from an altitude that gives us a 12-degree bombing angle," he explained to his crew. "Miss by 50 feet in any direction, and we either hit civilian housing or waste our ordnance on empty mountainside." The human cost of failure extended beyond military casualties. Rjukan's 3,500 residents lived within a half-mile radius of the plant. Norwegian resistance leader Knut Haukelid had provided detailed maps showing schools, hospitals, and residential areas that bombing crews must avoid at all costs. "These people have suffered under Nazi occupation for 3 years," Haukelid had told Allied planners during a clandestine meeting in London. "They deserve liberation, not annihilation." The technical challenge. Heavy water production required enormous amounts of electricity, approximately 100,000 kilowatt-hours per pound of deuterium oxide. The Vemork plant consumed more power than the entire city of Oslo, drawing energy from the Mona River's hydroelectric generators. German engineers had installed 9 electrolysis cascades, each containing 570 individual cells, where ordinary water molecules were systematically stripped of their lighter hydrogen isotopes. Dr. Leif Tronstad, a Norwegian chemist who had escaped to Britain, briefed Allied intelligence on the facility's vulnerabilities. The electrolysis chambers are housed in the basement level, protected by 8 feet of reinforced concrete, he explained. However, the cooling systems and power distribution networks remain exposed on the upper floors. Tronstad's intelligence proved invaluable. Rather than attempting to penetrate the heavily fortified production areas, bombing crews would target the plant's electrical infrastructure. Without power, the delicate electrolysis process would cease, and existing heavy water stocks would become inaccessible. December 1st, the point of no return. As Lady Liberty approached the initial point, Major Rosen felt the familiar pre-combat tension that had carried him through 23 previous missions over occupied Europe. His crew had survived the hell of Schweinfurt, the chaos of Ploegst, and the flak-filled skies over Berlin. But this mission felt different, more personal, more consequential. "Bombardier to pilot," Casey's voice crackled through the intercom. "I've got visual on the target. Beginning final approach." Below, the Vemork plant's distinctive architecture came into sharp focus. The main production building resembled a concrete cathedral, its Art Deco lines incongruous against the rugged Norwegian landscape. Steam rose from cooling towers, and Rosen could see tiny figures, German guards and Norwegian workers, moving between buildings like ants in a disturbed colony. Technical Sergeant Mike O'Brien, the tail gunner, reported enemy activity. "Skipper, I count 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s climbing from the south, range approximately 8 miles and closing." The Luftwaffe's response had been anticipated. German radar stations along the Norwegian coast had detected the incoming bomber formation 2 hours earlier. Oberst Hans-Joachim Marseille, commanding the 5th Fighter Wing, had scrambled every available aircraft to intercept what intelligence reports described as a major Allied bombing offensive against strategic Norwegian targets. The human element. Inside the Vemork plant, shift supervisor Eric Anderson felt the building vibrate as the first wave of bombers passed overhead. A veteran of the Great War, Anderson recognized the distinctive sound of American aircraft engines, deeper and more rhythmic than their German counterparts. "All personnel to emergency stations," he announced over the facility's public address system. His voice remained calm, professional, but his heart raced with anticipation. For months, Norwegian resistance cells had whispered about an Allied operation to destroy the heavy water production. Anderson had secretly hoped this day would come. Dr. Brun continued his frantic document destruction, feeding classified research papers into a small furnace in his office. Each page represented months of painstaking work: isotope separation rates, deuterium concentration formulas, reactor design specifications. The knowledge contained in those documents could advance nuclear physics by decades, but in German hands, it represented an existential threat to human civilization. "Herr Doctor," called SS Oberfuhrer Klaus Weber, the plant's German security chief. "You must evacuate to the bunker immediately." Brun looked up from his burning papers. "I need 5 more minutes to secure the laboratory equipment." Weber's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "The equipment is replaceable. Your expertise is not. Move, now." The bombing run. At 0351 hours, Casey released the first stick of 500-pound general-purpose bombs from Lady Liberty's bomb bay. The ordnance fell in a precise pattern, each explosion calculated to maximize structural damage while minimizing civilian casualties. The bomb's delayed action fuses allowed the aircraft to clear the target area before detonation, protecting the crew from their own shrapnel. The first explosion shattered the plant's main electrical substation, sending cascades of sparks into the morning darkness. Transformers weighing 15 tons each toppled like dominoes, their mineral oil coolant igniting in spectacular fireballs that illuminated the entire valley. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, radio operator aboard the bomber Memphis Belle II, watched the destruction unfold below. "Jesus Christ," he whispered into his microphone. "The whole place is lighting up like the 4th of July." The second wave of bombers targeted the cooling water intake systems. Without adequate cooling, The electrolysis chambers would overheat and shut down automatically. Each bomb created a crater 30 feet in diameter, severing pipelines that had taken German engineers 18 months to install. What nobody knew, but what the Allied planners didn't know, what even German intelligence had failed to discover, was that Dr. Werner Heisenberg himself was scheduled to arrive at Weymouth that very afternoon. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist had traveled from Berlin to personally inspect the heavy water production and evaluate its potential for the German nuclear program. Heisenberg's limousine, a black Mercedes-Benz 770K, was already en route from Oslo when the bombing commenced. The vehicle carried not only Germany's most brilliant nuclear scientist, but also classified documents detailing the Reich's atomic research progress. Those papers contained calculations that could have accelerated German bomb development by months, perhaps years. The physicist's driver, Hauptmann Friedrich Müller, heard the distant explosions and saw smoke rising from the Telemark Valley. "Herr Professor," he said, "perhaps we should return to Oslo." Heisenberg studied the horizon through his window. "No," he replied quietly. "Drive faster." The Luftwaffe response, Oberst Marseille's fighters reached the target area just as the third wave of B-24s began their bombing runs. The German ace, credited with 158 aerial victories, led his Messerschmitts in a diving attack that scattered the American formation. "Achtung, bandits at 2 o'clock high," shouted Lieutenant Hans Schilling, piloting the bomber Desert Rose. The aircraft's top turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Joe Brooklyn Kowalski, swiveled his twin 50-caliber machine guns toward the approaching fighters. The air battle that followed lasted 17 minutes and covered 40 square miles of Norwegian airspace. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the sky like deadly fireworks, while aircraft maneuvered in three-dimensional chess games of life and death. Desert Rose took cannon fire in her port wing, severing hydraulic lines and puncturing fuel tanks. Aviation gasoline streamed from the wounds, creating a vapor trail that marked the bomber's position for pursuing fighters. "We're losing fuel fast," reported flight engineer Tony Ricci. "At this rate, we've got maybe 30 minutes before the tanks run dry." Schilling faced an agonizing decision. Abort the mission and preserve his crew, or continue the bombing run and risk crashing in enemy territory. The choice epitomized the moral complexity that defined the entire war: individual survival versus collective victory. The turning point. The mission's decisive moment came when Sergeant Rodriguez intercepted a German radio transmission. His fluent German, learned from immigrant parents in Milwaukee, allowed him to eavesdrop on Luftwaffe communications. "Achtung alle Einheiten." The transmission crackled. "Protect the transport convoy at all costs. Repeat, protect the transport convoy." Rodriguez immediately relayed the intelligence to Major Rosen. "Skipper, the Krauts are talking about some kind of convoy. Sounds like it's more important than the plant itself." Rosen's tactical instincts, honed through 2 years of combat operations, recognized the significance. If the Germans were diverting fighters to protect a convoy, that convoy must contain something valuable, possibly the very heavy water stocks the mission aimed to destroy. "All aircraft, this is lead," Rosen radioed. "New priority target. German convoy moving south from Rjukan. Repeat, engage convoy vehicles." The chase. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles, 2 Wehrmacht trucks carrying 400 pounds of heavy water in specially designed containers, and Heisenberg's Mercedes limousine. The physicist had arrived at the plant just as the bombing commenced and was now fleeing with the Reich's most precious scientific cargo. Captain Sarah Lightning Mitchell, piloting the fighter-bomber Thunderbolt, spotted the convoy snaking through mountain roads 15 miles south of Weymouth. Her P-47 Thunderbolt carried 8 50-caliber machine guns and 2,500 rounds of ammunition, enough firepower to stop an armored column. "I've got eyes on 3 vehicles," Mitchell reported. 2 trucks and a staff car moving fast on Highway 37. The pursuit that followed resembled a deadly game of cat and mouse, played across Norway's unforgiving terrain. Mitchell's aircraft dove through mountain passes barely wide enough for her 40-foot wingspan, while German drivers desperately sought cover beneath rocky overhangs and forest canopies. Heisenberg, pressed against the Mercedes's leather seats as Muller swerved around hairpin turns, clutched his briefcase containing nuclear research data. The physicist understood that his survival, and the survival of Germany's atomic program, depended on reaching the safety of a Luftwaffe airfield 60 miles away. Mitchell's first strafing run disabled the lead truck, sending it careening off the mountain road into a 200-foot ravine. The second truck attempted to escape by reversing direction, but Mitchell's follow-up attack punctured its radiator and engine block. Steam erupted from the vehicle's hood as it coasted to a stop, its precious cargo now inaccessible to German forces. Only Heisenberg's Mercedes remained mobile. Müller, a veteran of the Afrika Korps, employed evasive driving techniques learned during Rommel's desert campaigns. The limousine weaved between boulders and trees, using the terrain's natural cover to avoid Mitchell's gun runs. "Come on, you bastard," Mitchell muttered, lining up her final attack. Her ammunition counter showed 180 rounds remaining, enough for one decisive burst. The physicist's fate hung in the balance of split-second timing and mechanical precision. As Mitchell's guns opened fire, Müller threw the Mercedes into a sharp left turn that carried the vehicle behind a granite outcropping. Bullets sparked off stone, but the car emerged unscathed on the far side. What changed everything was a single photograph. As Heisenberg's Mercedes disappeared into a tunnel, Mitchell's gun camera captured an image that would reshape Allied understanding of the German nuclear program. The photograph showed the physicist's distinctive profile through the limousine's rear window. Unmistakable evidence that Germany's top atomic scientist had been personally overseeing heavy water production. When Allied intelligence analysts examined the film footage 3 days later, they realized the true scope of the Nazi nuclear threat. Heisenberg's presence at Weymouth indicated that German atomic research had progressed far beyond theoretical calculations. The Reich was actively pursuing weapons-grade nuclear materials. "This changes everything," declared General Leslie Groves, director of the Manhattan Project, during an emergency briefing at Los Alamos. "If Heisenberg is personally involved in heavy water production, we're not just racing against German scientists, we're racing against time itself." The photograph triggered an immediate acceleration of American nuclear research. Funding for the Manhattan Project increased by 300%, and the number of scientists assigned to bomb development doubled within 6 weeks. The image of Heisenberg fleeing through Norwegian mountains became the catalyst for history's most intensive scientific endeavor. The bombing of Weymouth achieved its immediate objectives with devastating efficiency. Post-mission reconnaissance revealed that 89% of the plant's electrical infrastructure had been destroyed, halting heavy water production for a minimum of 8 months. The facility's annual output capacity dropped from 10,000 pounds to 0 overnight. German losses extended beyond industrial damage. The convoy attack eliminated 1,400 pounds of heavy water, representing 18 months of production at maximum capacity. At 1943 prices, the destroyed deuterium oxide was valued at $5.6 million, equivalent to $94 million in current dollars. More significantly, the mission forced German scientists to relocate their nuclear research to less efficient facilities in Bavaria and Thuringia. This geographical dispersion reduced research coordination and slowed theoretical progress by an estimated 40%. American casualties were remarkably light, considering the mission's complexity. 3 B-24 bombers sustained battle damage, but all aircraft returned to base. Total personnel losses: 0 killed, 4 wounded. The 392nd Bombardment Group had achieved a tactical miracle. Norwegian civilian casualties numbered 12 killed and 37 wounded. A tragic but relatively small toll given the operation's scale. Dr. Brun survived the bombing and continued his resistance activities, eventually escaping to Britain in 1944. His destroyed research documents were never recovered, dealing a permanent blow to German nuclear physics. Heisenberg reached safety but arrived in Berlin empty-handed. His briefcase, containing months of theoretical calculations, had been abandoned during the convoy attack. The physicist's report to Nazi leadership painted a grim picture. Germany's nuclear program had suffered a setback that could prove insurmountable. "The heavy water situation is now critical," Heisenberg wrote in his classified assessment. "Without Norwegian production, we cannot achieve reactor criticality before 1946 at the earliest." The Weymouth raid's success reverberated through the highest levels of Allied command. Winston Churchill, briefed on the mission's results, declared it a blow struck at the very heart of Nazi scientific ambition. The Prime Minister immediately authorized additional operations against German nuclear facilities, including the bombing of research reactors in Haigerloch and Stadtilm. Stalin, informed through intelligence channels, accelerated Soviet nuclear research in response to evidence of German atomic capabilities. The Wehrmacht photographs convinced the Soviet leader that nuclear weapons represented the future of warfare, leading to the establishment of the Soviet atomic program under Igor Kurchatov. President Roosevelt, already committed to the Manhattan Project, used the Norwegian intelligence to justify increased military spending on nuclear research. Congressional appropriations for atomic weapons development increased from $500 million to $2 billion within 6 months of the Wehrmacht raid. By spring 1944, the strategic balance had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. German nuclear research, crippled by the loss of heavy water production, struggled to maintain momentum. Heisenberg's team, relocated to underground facilities in southern Germany, lacked the resources and materials necessary for weapons development. Meanwhile, American scientists at Los Alamos achieved their first controlled nuclear chain reaction using graphite moderators rather than heavy water. The breakthrough, accomplished on December 2, 1942, exactly 1 year before the Wehrmacht raid, had already given the United States a decisive advantage in the atomic race. Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, scientific director of the Manhattan Project, later acknowledged the Norwegian mission's psychological impact. Knowing that we had disrupted German nuclear research allowed our scientists to focus on perfection rather than speed. We could pursue the optimal design rather than the quickest solution. German attempts to salvage their nuclear program culminated in Operation Bernhard, a desperate plan to transport remaining heavy water stocks from Norway to the Reich. In February 1944, Norwegian resistance fighters, acting on intelligence provided by British Special Operations Executive, sabotaged the ferry SF Hydro as it carried the last 600 pounds of deuterium oxide across Lake Tinn. The ferry sinking, which claimed 18 lives, including German guards and Norwegian civilians, marked the end of Nazi nuclear ambitions. With no heavy water and limited uranium supplies, German scientists abandoned weapons research in favor of theoretical studies that posed no immediate military threat. Knut Haukelid, the resistance leader who planted the explosives aboard SF Hydro, later reflected on the moral complexity of his actions. "We killed innocent people to prevent a greater evil. History will judge whether the sacrifice was justified." By war's end, the technological gap between Allied and German nuclear capabilities had become insurmountable. The United States possessed 2 functional atomic bombs and the industrial capacity to produce additional weapons at a rate of 3 per month. Germany's nuclear program, by contrast, had never progressed beyond laboratory experiments with subcritical uranium assemblies. Post-war interrogations of German scientists revealed the extent of their technological limitations. Without heavy water, Nazi researchers had been unable to achieve sustained nuclear reactions. Their most advanced reactor, constructed in a cave near Haigerloch, contained only 664 kilograms of uranium, far below the critical mass necessary for weapons production. Werner Heisenberg, captured by Allied forces in May 1945, admitted that German nuclear research had been fundamentally compromised by the loss of Norwegian heavy water production. The physicist's private papers, recovered from his Berlin laboratory, showed that Nazi scientists had underestimated the technical challenges of atomic weapons by several orders of magnitude. The Wehrmacht raid exemplified the interconnected nature of modern warfare, where scientific research, industrial production, and military operations converged to determine strategic outcomes. The mission's success demonstrated that small, precisely targeted actions could produce effects far exceeding their immediate scope. Intelligence analysis conducted after the war revealed that the Norwegian operation had shortened the conflict by an estimated 6 to 8 months. By preventing German nuclear weapons development, the raid eliminated the possibility of a Nazi wonder weapon that could have prolonged resistance or forced a negotiated peace. The human cost of this acceleration, measured in lives saved by earlier victory, numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Soviet casualties during the final push to Berlin, American losses in the Pacific Theater, and civilian deaths from continued bombing campaigns were all reduced by the mission's success. Major Rosen's decision-making during the Vemork raid became a case study in military leadership schools throughout the post-war period. His ability to adapt tactical plans based on real-time intelligence, specifically the decision to pursue the German convoy, demonstrated the importance of flexible thinking in combat situations. Leadership in war requires the courage to abandon perfect plans in favor of perfect timing, Rosen later wrote in his memoirs. We succeeded not because our strategy was flawless, but because we remained open to opportunity when it presented itself. The Major's post-war career included command positions in the Korean War and service as an instructor at the Air War College. His emphasis on adaptive leadership and real-time decision-making influenced a generation of military officers who would face similar challenges in subsequent conflicts. The Vemork operation's impact extended far beyond its immediate military objectives. By disrupting German nuclear research, the raid ensured that atomic weapons remained an American monopoly during the crucial early years of the Cold War. This technological advantage shaped post-war diplomacy and established the United States as the dominant global superpower. Dr. Brun, the Norwegian scientist who had destroyed his research documents during the bombing, emigrated to the United States in 1946. His expertise in heavy water production proved invaluable to American nuclear programs, contributing to the development of hydrogen bombs and nuclear power reactors. The physicists' collaboration with American scientists represented a form of intellectual reparations, knowledge gained under Nazi occupation redirected toward peaceful purposes. Brun's work on reactor safety systems helped establish the foundation for civilian nuclear power, transforming the destructive potential of atomic energy into a source of electricity for millions of homes. The ethical implications of the Vemork raid continued to resonate decades after the war's end. The mission's success had prevented Nazi Germany from acquiring nuclear weapons, but it had also accelerated the development of American atomic bombs that would devastate Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Captain Mitchell, the pilot who had pursued Heisenberg's convoy, struggled with the moral complexity of her actions. "We stopped the Nazis from getting the bomb," she reflected in a 1985 interview, "but we couldn't stop anyone from using it." The philosophical questions raised by the Norwegian operation, the relationship between scientific knowledge and military power, the responsibility of researchers for their discoveries' applications, the moral calculus of preemptive action, would define nuclear policy debates for generations. The Vemork mission marked a turning point in the relationship between scientific intelligence and military planning. For the first time in history, detailed knowledge of enemy research capabilities had directly influenced strategic bombing priorities. The operation demonstrated that understanding adversary science was as important as understanding adversary intentions. This recognition led to the establishment of dedicated scientific intelligence units within Allied military organizations. The Office of Scientific Research and Development, created in response to lessons learned from the Norwegian raid, became the prototype for modern defense research agencies. Post-war intelligence operations increasingly focused on monitoring foreign scientific developments, particularly in nuclear physics, rocket technology, and electronic warfare. The Vemork precedent established the principle that scientific superiority was synonymous with national security. The destruction of heavy water production at Vemork represented one of history's most cost-effective military operations. The mission's total expense, including aircraft fuel, ordnance, and personnel costs, amounted to approximately $180,000 in 1943 dollars. The economic damage inflicted on German nuclear research exceeded $50 million, creating a return on investment of nearly 300.1. This economic efficiency became a model for subsequent strategic bombing campaigns. Rather than attempting to destroy entire industrial complexes, Allied planners increasingly focused on critical bottlenecks that could paralyze enemy production with minimal resource expenditure. The concept of economic warfare, targeting enemy vulnerabilities rather than enemy strengths, evolved directly from lessons learned during the Norwegian operation. Post-war military doctrine emphasized precision over mass, intelligence over firepower, and strategic thinking over tactical execution. The technological arms race. The Vemork raid's success paradoxically accelerated the very arms race it had been designed to prevent. By demonstrating the military potential of nuclear weapons, the operation convinced world leaders that atomic capabilities were essential for national survival. Soviet nuclear research, initiated in response to intelligence about German atomic programs, continued after the war's end with renewed urgency. Stalin's scientists, led by Igor Kurchatov, achieved their first nuclear detonation in 1949, 4 years after Hiroshima, but decades ahead of original projections. British nuclear research, similarly motivated by wartime intelligence about Axis atomic programs, produced the United Kingdom's first nuclear weapon in 1952. French and Chinese nuclear programs followed similar trajectories, each justified by the perceived necessity of maintaining strategic parity with potential adversaries. Behind the strategic implications and technological consequences lay individual human stories that illustrated the war's personal dimensions. Sergeant Rodriguez, the radio operator whose German language skills had identified the convoy, returned to Milwaukee after the war and used his military experience to build a successful electronics business. Dr. Brun's son, Eric, born in 1944, grew up hearing stories about his father's wartime resistance activities. The younger Brun became a nuclear engineer himself, working on reactor safety systems that incorporated lessons learned from his father's experiences with German atomic research. Captain Mitchell married her co-pilot, Lieutenant James Tex Harrison, in a ceremony attended by surviving members of the 392nd Bombardment Group. Their daughter, Susan, became a peace activist during the Vietnam War, motivated partly by her mother's stories about the moral complexity of military service. The Wehrmacht operation's influence extended into unexpected areas of post-war society. The mission's emphasis on precision bombing and minimal civilian casualties became a template for humanitarian military intervention, influencing operations from the Berlin airlift to modern peacekeeping missions. The raid's success also contributed to the development of special operations forces as distinct military units. The coordination between conventional bombing and resistance activities demonstrated the potential for small, highly trained teams to achieve strategic objectives that would require much larger conventional forces. NATO's establishment in 1949 reflected lessons learned from wartime scientific cooperation. The alliance's emphasis on shared intelligence and coordinated research programs drew directly from the collaborative model that had made the Norwegian operation possible. The heavy water destroyed during the Wehrmacht raid represented more than just a military target. It embodied humanity's first encounter with the environmental implications of nuclear technology. The deuterium oxide that spilled across Norwegian mountainsides was harmless, but it symbolized the potential for atomic weapons to contaminate entire regions. Post-war environmental monitoring of the Wehrmacht area revealed no lasting contamination from the bombing or the spilled heavy water. However, the operations planners had been acutely aware of the potential for environmental damage, leading to the development of protocols for assessing the ecological impact of military operations. These environmental considerations became increasingly important as nuclear weapons testing began in earnest during the late 1940s. The precedent established at Wehrmacht, that military necessity must be balanced against environmental consequences, influenced decisions about testing locations and safety procedures. The Wehrmacht raid entered popular culture as a symbol of Allied ingenuity and determination. Hollywood films, beginning with The Heroes of Telemark in 1965, dramatized the operation's human elements while sometimes sacrificing historical accuracy for entertainment value. Norwegian national identity was profoundly shaped by the wartime resistance activities that had made the Allied bombing possible. The country's post-war commitment to international peacekeeping and nuclear disarmament reflected lessons learned from its role in preventing Nazi atomic weapons development. The operation's legacy influenced Cold War propaganda on both sides of the Iron Curtain. American accounts emphasized the mission's precision and humanitarian considerations, while Soviet narratives focused on the dangers of capitalist nuclear monopolies. Despite the Wehrmacht raid's success, German nuclear research continued in reduced form until the war's end. Allied intelligence agencies maintained surveillance of Nazi scientists throughout 1944 and 1945, leading to Operation Paperclip, the controversial program that brought German researchers to the United States after the war. Werner Heisenberg, the physicist whose convoy had escaped Captain Mitchell's attack, was interrogated extensively by Allied intelligence officers. His testimony revealed that German nuclear research had been hampered not only by material shortages, but also by theoretical misconceptions about reactor design and weapons physics. The physicist's post-war career included efforts to establish international controls on nuclear weapons development. His experiences during the war, particularly the narrow escape from the Norwegian convoy attack, had convinced him that atomic weapons posed an existential threat to human civilization. Unknown to Allied planners at the time, the Vemork operation had benefited from a crucial piece of German strategic deception. Nazi intelligence services, seeking to protect their actual nuclear research facilities, had deliberately exaggerated the importance of Norwegian heavy water production. The real center of German atomic research was located at Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, where scientists were pursuing uranium enrichment through gaseous diffusion rather than heavy water moderation. By focusing Allied attention on Norway, German intelligence hoped to protect their primary research efforts. This deception ultimately backfired. The destruction of heavy water production forced German scientists to rely entirely on their enrichment programs, which proved technically unfeasible with wartime resources. The loss of the Norwegian backup option eliminated Germany's only realistic path to nuclear weapons. The Vemork raid facilitated an unprecedented transfer of nuclear technology from occupied Europe to the Allied powers. Norwegian scientists who escaped to Britain brought detailed knowledge of German research methods, while captured documents provided insights into Nazi theoretical approaches. This intelligence proved invaluable to the Manhattan Project, allowing American scientists to avoid theoretical dead ends that had consumed months of German research time. The cross-pollination of ideas accelerated Allied nuclear development while simultaneously hampering Axis progress. Post-war analysis revealed that the technological transfer initiated by the Norwegian operation had shortened American atomic weapons development by an estimated 8 to 12 months. This acceleration proved crucial in ending the Pacific War, before a costly invasion of Japan became necessary. The Vemork operation's success influenced post-war diplomatic relationships in unexpected ways. Norway's contribution to Allied victory, symbolized by the heavy water sabotage, earned the country a prominent role in NATO's founding and ongoing operations. The mission also established precedents for international cooperation in preventing weapons proliferation. The collaborative intelligence gathering that had made the raid possible became a model for post-war arms control verification, influencing treaties from the nuclear test ban to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Soviet awareness of the operation's success contributed to Stalin's decision to accelerate his own nuclear program. The demonstration that atomic weapons research could be disrupted by conventional military action convinced Soviet leaders that nuclear capabilities were essential for national defense. Military historians studying the Vemork raid identified several key factors that contributed to its success: accurate intelligence, precise planning, tactical flexibility, and moral clarity about objectives. These elements became standard components of special operations doctrine throughout the Cold War period. The mission's emphasis on minimizing civilian casualties while maximizing strategic impact influenced the development of precision-guided munitions and surgical strike capabilities. Modern military technology traces its lineage directly to lessons learned over the Norwegian mountains in 1943. Perhaps most importantly, the operation demonstrated that small, well-informed actions could produce strategic effects far exceeding their immediate scope. This principle would guide military planning from the Berlin crisis through the Gulf War and beyond. 60 years after the last bombs fell on Vemork, the operation's significance continues to resonate through contemporary debates about nuclear proliferation, preemptive military action, and the relationship between scientific research and national security. The mission succeeded not merely because of superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but because it embodied a clear moral purpose: preventing weapons of mass destruction from falling into the hands of a genocidal regime. The men and women who participated in the Vemork raid, from Major Rosen in his B-24 cockpit to Dr. Brun destroying documents in his laboratory, understood that they were fighting not just for military victory, but for the future of human civilization. Their success ensured that the atomic age would begin under democratic rather than totalitarian auspices. In an era when nuclear weapons remain humanity's greatest existential threat, the lessons of VMORC retain their relevance. The operation demonstrated that preventing proliferation requires not just military capability, but also international cooperation, scientific understanding, and moral courage. These principles remain as vital today as they were in the frozen skies above Norway 8 decades ago. The courage to act decisively when civilization itself hangs in the balance defines the difference between mere survival and meaningful victory. Sometimes the fate of the world turns on a single mission flown by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In the end, 34 bombers changed the course of history, not through the weight of their ordnance, but through the precision of their purpose.